The good news is we're all in this together. And when we see we're together, we can work things out. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Energy Week with George Harvey and the charming Lori Cartwright. Famous Lori Cartwright.
Hopefully not too famous.
Well, people around here know Lori because she's been on the school board for a while, and I guess you've been obviously you've been in the town meetings, the representative town meetings for a while.
Yes.
And Lori is an engineer for this show. Aside from that, I think you have no engineering background.
That is accurate.
Okay. But Lori does have an advantage when it comes to knowing what to say, and that is that she's an attorney and can see the legal implications of some of the things that come up. So I guess I should explain the show to anybody who happens to wonder. Every day I get up, go straight to work, and start looking at the internet for news relating to energy and climate change for the previous 24 hours. And anything that I find that's interesting, I build a 50 or 55 word synopsis and a link to the original article. I assemble 10 to 15 of those and put them up on my blog, geoharvey.com, geoharvey.com. You can go there, and we'll try to keep you up on what date we're talking about. You can go to the blog and click on the calendar on the date, and it will take you to the blog entry for that date, and then you can find the articles that we're talking about, and click on the link there and read the entire article. So should we get going? Our first item is from Renewable Energy magazine. And do you have a title for that, Lori?
New system significantly reduces power consumption of vertical farms.
Do you know anything about vertical farming?
I don't know as much as I would like to know. It's
Well,
a very interesting concept, and I haven't seen it in action. So
well, click on the picture there, and we'll put this up so people can see it.
Lovely.
That is not a photograph. That is an artist rendering, and I'm quite certain of that because all the leaves are exactly the same shape. Anyway, the energy efficiency of vertical farms should soon be boosted by about 20%. A new system developed by a student at Brunel University in London, V-Farm, a design student, Johnny Reeder, uses OLEDs, this is organic light-emitting diodes, and smart automation to reduce the amount of power used in vertical farming. Now, that's the energy efficiency. It doesn't increase the output, but the output of these vertical farms is stunning. It's so big, because what they are is multi-tiered hydroponic farms. And you know, I did an interview, because I interview people for Green Energy Times. I did an interview of a farm in New Hampshire. And you know, I honestly can't remember the name of it right now, but they sell at the co-op. And they you know, their stuff is in the produce section, and it's a hydroponic farm. And the guy who I interviewed told me that out of a 1 acre greenhouse, they get 1 million pounds of produce a year.
that's stunning.
Isn't it? Now, you take that thing that you see on the screen and you say, how many acres of surface can you get by putting one row of things, and then above it another row of things, and then above it another row of things. And you can see how, you know, now what we've got is supermarkets and restaurants and so forth that are growing fresh produce in shipping containers in the parking lot.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. The only thing that bothers me about it is David Zuckerman, the Lieutenant Governor of Vermont, is an organic farmer, and he says, that ain't organic.
Oh.
Because there's no soil. He says, in order to do organic farming, you have to have the roots in the soil. You want to switch that back to
Sure.
us? Okay. Got any more to say about that?
Well, I was trying to remember the name of the farm. I I know who you're talking about, the farm in New Hampshire, but I can't think of it. So I'll click.
Yep, there you go. Okay, our next item is from North American Wind Power.
New Wind 12 project would put MidAmerican Energy at 100% new renewables.
Now, MidAmerican Energy is an interesting company. It's part of Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's organization, and he is behind this. MidAmerican Energy proposed building a 591 megawatt wind farm, formerly filed with the Iowa Utilities Board. The company said it will be the first investor-owned electric utility in the country to generate renewable energy equal to 100% of its customers' usage on an annual basis when the Wind 12 project is finished. Kind of stunning.
Yes. Where in the country is that?
Well, it's in, the wind farm is in Iowa, I think.
Okay.
I believe the wind farm is in Iowa. MidAmerican is a utility that is in several plain states, and I don't know exactly what, but I believe this wind farm is in Iowa. It's filed with the Iowa Utilities
Okay.
Board. I think that being the case, it's probably not in Pennsylvania.
No. Well, I was focusing on the MidAmerican part of the name of the company, and I was bypassing the fact that we said Iowa. So
Yeah.
it's good to have that perspective.
Okay, we have a picture coming up here.
Great.
And
The engineer is a little green, but let's see.
there you go.
Voila.
There you go. Okay, this item is from Renews.
Ah,
Title?
I like the way they've named their source. Revolution Jobs Bonanza in U.S.
Deepwater Wind's 400 megawatt Revolution Wind offshore wind farm is expected to create over 800 jobs in construction and 50 permanent positions in the state of Rhode Island. The developer is also planning to invest $250 million in the state, including $40 million in port investment. Work on the project could start as early as 2020. So this is not going to be the last wind farm going into Rhode Island waters. They've got a lot planned here. And what you're seeing in the picture is 80% of all of the wind turbines that are installed offshore in the United States right now. We are so far behind.
Most of them.
We are so far behind practically everybody else who's got a lot of potential to do this.
We're up to Friday.
We're up to Friday, June 1st. Why don't you put us up on the screen,
Okay.
Lori? And we have an item here from Clean Technica.
AT&T announces zero waste goal for 100 facilities by end of 2020.
American telecom giant AT&T has announced this week a new goal to achieve zero waste at 100 of its facilities by the end of 2020 as part of its larger environmental commitments and policies. AT&T's other environmental and energy achievements this year have included a power purchase agreement for 520 megawatts of wind power. This is, zero waste is an interesting concept. They're not talking about just energy here. They're talking about their cafeterias. They're talking about their printers in their offices. They're talking about all kinds of things.
That is
Furniture.
an outstanding goal.
It is.
Hard to imagine how much that will be replacing zero. What is it now? And then they're going to achieve zero.
That's an important thing. Another thing, too, though, Lori, is waste is turning out to be extremely valuable. Just to give you an idea, farm waste, agricultural waste, regardless of what form it comes in, it could be cow poop, or it could be straw from a field that is not going to be used for any other purpose. I remember going down a road in Massachusetts years ago and seeing a farm field in which all of the pumpkins had been hit by frost. And all winter there were pumpkins out there in the field just sitting there slowly decomposing. All of that can go into biodigesters. And from those biodigesters you can get compost and electricity. And I don't know how many we've got now. The last time I looked, there were fewer than 300 of these in the United States. There were 1 million of them in China, at least.
Oh my goodness.
But the USDA was saying that farms in the United States could have at least 11,000 of them. And in China, they use them on the household level.
Oh my goodness.
Where they are used to manufacture gas that they can use for cooking.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that fun? Okay.
Well, we'll have a lot of AT&T derived energy or
Yes.
whatnot.
We
Beautiful.
have an item coming up, and I just lost my place. We have an item coming up from Bloomberg. There we go. And we've got a picture of a polluting power plant coming up there. What do you got for a title, Lori?
Trump to grant lifeline to money-losing coal power plants.
Isn't this delightful?
And I love how the focus is on money-losing
Yeah.
and not other adjectives or whatnot.
Trump administration officials are making plans to order grid operators to buy electricity from struggling coal and nuclear power plants in order to, in an effort to extend their lives. The DOE would exercise federal emergency authority for unprecedented intervention into U.S. energy markets, according to a memo obtained by Bloomberg News.
Excuse me.
This is a, you know, I can't tell you how many articles I've seen about this. We're going to have more articles in this broadcast about it. But, you know, the Republicans have had this thing about not intervening in markets, and all of a sudden they've got to either back Donald Trump intervening in this market or go against him. And I think, you know, some are doing one thing and some are doing another. But this is a really, really unpopular idea to force people to buy power from these plants.
This is the most disturbing thing I've read thus far
Well,
in this broadcast.
yes, the one of the things that comes to mind here, you know, last year I came across a study that was done by students at MIT, students and faculty at MIT, that indicated that 200,000 people in the United States are killed every year by pollution. That is the most conservative estimate I have ever seen. Other estimates are above twice that number. Now, when I was a kid and I found out that people were dying because of pollution, I went to my father and said, why don't we do something about this? And he said, because we need to run these plants in order to keep our economy going. We don't have a choice. If we didn't run them, more people would die as a result. That was an acceptable answer, I think, for the time. Today,
A few years ago.
a few years ago, like 60 years ago, today, we don't have to do this.
No, we do not.
Which means that this decision is to kill people.
The implications of this are so alarming. I might have a hard time talking about it because it's alarming on so many levels. It's not just the political implications of what the president is trying to do, unprecedented. It's the fact that not only are these plants money losing, but they're obviously very dirty, and
Yeah.
we do have a choice.
We have a choice. The authority that he is doing this under is similar to, I don't think that he's actually using the same laws, but at the beginning of the Second World War, sometime around, I don't know, spring of 1942, the federal government went to the car manufacturers in Detroit and said, you're not allowed to make passenger vehicles for private use anymore. And they stopped. You cannot buy a 1943 Chevrolet unless you buy something that was once used by the Army or once used by a police force. They just don't exist. And there were a lot of things that people could not buy. And the shortage of cars was so great that after the Second World War, if you could get a new car, you would know that a year later you'd be able to sell it for more than you bought it for, because very few people could buy new cars. That is the kind of authority that Donald Trump wants to use in order to keep, the purpose of this is to keep obsolete technology and obsolete plants in operation. For whom? Who is benefiting from this?
Again, my biggest concern is not just that they're obsolete, but the fact that they're so dirty, and the issues surrounding energy derived from the nuclear power plants is just so complicated. It's just very, very not in our best interest.
The American Lung Association in California did a study, I think it's probably 2 years ago now. They concluded that the people in the state of Vermont are spending $330 million a year on medical bills associated with air pollution coming from vehicles. And that comes to about $480 per person per year. That's coming out of the pockets of all of us, because we all have medical insurance and we all pay taxes. Okay, maybe there's a few homeless people who aren't paying for it. But everybody else is paying because of pollution. And people should bear that in mind. We are up to an article from the BBC about car companies. You want to put us up again?
Sure.
There you go.
And we are going to discuss General Motors and Fiat Chrysler unveil self-driving deals.
The race to lead America's self-driving car market moved up a gear. Japan's SoftBank is putting $2.25 billion into GM's autonomous unit Cruise. That's the name of the unit. One of the biggest single investments in self-driving technology. And Waymo, which is owned by Google, is buying up. Can you imagine what it would have been like if when we were like 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 years old, having companies called Waymo and Google?
No.
Is buying up 62,000 Fiat Chrysler minivans for its autonomous fleet.
Goodness.
Self-driving cars. This sounds like the Jetsons. Should we go on? Or do you have things to observe about that?
No.
Okay. Okay, we are up to Saturday, June 2nd, and we have an item from Green Tech Media and another. I have to apologize for these pictures that we've got this week. You know, I pick pictures that are associated with, actually almost all of them are in the articles that we talk about. And these are the pictures that they had this week, and the reason was because of this thing of Donald Trump's. You know, the week has been full of
doom and gloom.
Doom and gloom. Old power plants. This particular power plant is closed, and this is from Green Tech Media. What's the title, Lori?
Breaking down the opposition to DOE's emergency coal and nuclear bailout plan.
It's hard to overstate how negative the my gosh. You know how Lori feels.
Not just here?
Not just here.
Good.
How negative the reactions have been to news about that the Trump administration is directing the U.S. Department of Energy to find ways to force Americans to buy power from uncompetitive coal and nuclear plants in the name of national security. And, you know, I sit here and I think to myself, national security. Okay, you take the security threats that have been identified by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and NASA, They identified two different things, either one of which could bring the entire U.S. grid down for over a year. One of them was an attack on transmission systems, and the other was a solar flare, which could shut down basically the entire American grid would be destroyed, and much of it would be down for over 3 years, which is bad for business, by the way. People can't make a lot of money when they can't sell anything. Anyway, the solution to that is distributed power. If you don't have a grid, it doesn't matter if the grid goes down.
Right.
And you know, in other respects, terrorist attacks and things like that, they can attack power plants. Power plants go down. All of these things are representing problems, and they want to have big power plants in operation. What possible excuse could that be?
Well, it's interesting that their excuse is national security, but you've just highlighted how that's completely inconsistent.
And FEMA, who's, you know, the Federal Energy Management Agency, is run by 5 people, 4 of whom were appointed by Donald Trump, and they said this is not necessary. So Donald Trump is acting against his own people's advice, the people he hired to give him advice.
Oh my goodness.
So
I think that will be his legacy.
I think it may be. You should put us back up.
All right.
Madam
I'm
Engineer.
starting to get a little comfortable with the technology.
Oh.
Oh no, I used the wrong,
wrong mouse? Yep, that's
it's a
okay.
2-mouse system.
That's okay. You're doing fine. Okay.
Oh yes.
Did read the thing from Green Tech Media. So let's go on to Reuters Africa and the Pope.
Yes. Pope to address oil majors in Vatican climate conference.
The Vatican will host executives of top oil companies to this is so funny, for a conference next week on climate change and the transition away from fossil fuels, a Vatican source said. Pope Francis, who wrote a major document on protection of the environment from global warming in 2015, is expected to address the group on the last day of the conference. You know, I just love this. I forget which one of our Republican senators it was, but after that document came out, he said, the Pope should stick to religion and let scientists take care of science. This was a guy who was in a party that is denying science.
Yes.
And interestingly, he had no background in science, but the Pope has got a master's degree in chemistry.
I do remember that comment, and I also don't recall the name of our senator, ours being the United States. I wouldn't want to put words into the mouth of one of our state senators, although they're not Republicans. At any rate, we have a picture.
We have a picture coming up of a coal-burning power plant.
Again.
Again.
Our favorite.
Yeah, this is an article from Clean Technica.
Okay.
Got a title?
I do.
Good.
Social cost of coal must now be considered by Washington utilities.
This is Washington State, obviously.
Yes.
The Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission directed 3 utilities in the state to include the social cost of coal in their future planning. These include the costs of effects on human health and environmental damage. The social cost of coal will be $42 per metric ton by 2020 and will rise to $60 per metric ton by 2040. And you know, I don't think that's enough.
I was thinking the same exact thing.
But that
It's a start.
it's a start.
Quantifying it.
Yes. The American Lung Association study that I mentioned earlier said that the cost of human health damage from the use of fossil fuels for transportation is the equivalent of $1.80 per gallon of gasoline. So if we had that social cost included, if we had the cost of the emphysema attacks and the lung cancer and all of that thing included, we're not talking about compensation to victims for the pain they suffer, just the medical costs. The price of gasoline would have to be up by $1.80 a gallon.
And that's only one of the costs to human health.
That's
we
only,
haven't even started to unravel the
environmental
web
costs.
of environmental costs, which
it's
would
absolutely
probably
crazy.
Be impossible to quantify.
Well,
but
yeah, how
no
much do
one
you
would.
Exactly. How do you quantify the fact that we're losing about 2% of our animal populations every year? The actual population is declining by about 2% per year. And it's, we're in crazy territory here, and people are denying this. We have an item coming up from PV Magazine USA, and this takes us back to MidAmerican.
Buffett buys a gigawatt of solar power and 400
megawatt
hours of energy storage. Maybe.
Why don't you put us back up, Laura? Only a day after MidAmerican Energy announced that it would be the first investor-owned utility to be 100% renewable energy by 2020 with a 591 megawatt wind farm, it had more news. MidAmerican subsidiary NV Energy, NV operates in Nevada.
Okay.
Will procure power from 1,001 megawatts of new solar projects and 100 megawatt, 400 megawatt hour battery storage. So this is solar power backed up by battery. And one of the things that's really interesting about this thing of batteries, I don't see renewable energy proposals coming up very often for Australia and more for the United States and Europe that don't have battery backup involved in them. And it's not because they need the battery backup. It's because they can make money with the battery backup. And that thing that happened in Australia, South Australia, where Elon Musk put in that huge battery, that battery, the pay down time on return on investment is going to be achieved in about 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
And why is that? It's because not only is it backing up the variable renewable energy, it's also backing up fossil fuels because they're inflexible. So they can't change with demand. The problem that fossil fuels have, their inability to change with demand, is as bad or worse than the variability of renewable energy. And Vermont Yankee originally was 500, my recollection was that it was 520 megawatts. I came across a figure this last week that said they were 500. It doesn't really matter. But at the very same moment that was built, the Northfield Mountain Station was being built, which has a potential output of 1,040 megawatts, twice as big, to back it up, because it wasn't enough to provide peak demand, but it would provide demand during the middle of the night when nobody wanted it.
Although that was one of the big reasons that the proponents touted for why we might need the Vermont Yankee plant to produce our power, was to be a steady source at
Absolutely.
all times of demand and all types of demand, but that's not in fact even true.
We don't need a steady source. We need a source that varies. And that's why they built the Northfield Station. And that is also part of the reason why this thing of Donald Trump's trying to save coal
And nuclear.
And nuclear, yes. Okay, we're up to Sunday, June 3rd.
Oh my goodness.
And we have a picture of Trump's vision for America. You want to put that picture up? I had to apologize.
Do I have to?
People can see it in the background.
Oh,
we can
okay.
just leave it there, but I think
No.
I think you should put it up so people can get a really clear look at this.
Okay.
This looks like a piece of artwork, but it ain't.
Oh. So the farm was artwork and the power plant is life. Okay.
Yes, the vertical farm was artwork, but this looks like something out of that movie. What was the movie? Twister, where they were talking about
A
tornadoes.
number come to mind.
Okay, this is from Clean Technica again. Okay.
Trump's coal rescue plan will force taxpayers to bail out a dying industry.
Well, obviously, we've got article after article after article that were appearing about this plan, and a lot of it was opinion pieces, which this is, but it came from Clean Technica. The Trump administration is considering a plan to order utilities to buy power from coal-burning plants. It is a plan that would force you to buy more expensive power, dirtier electricity that is more likely to cause you health problems and might even cause you premature death. Now, let's put that down again. Okay. Take the movie, rather the picture off, and we can return to your smiling face, Lori.
I'm smiling.
Actually, you are right
After
now.
that.
Yeah, you are right now. The MIT study that I mentioned earlier, the number of people is 200,000 per year in the United States. Vermont's air is not clean. People like to think of it as clean, but it isn't. It has just come from New York, Massachusetts maybe, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. When I was a little kid, we used to drive through Indiana and I'd see the steel plants what's the name of the town? Gary.
Oh.
Steel plants in Gary. And you know, I would get sick 15 minutes before we got to Gary, and I'd be sick until half an hour and 45 minutes after we left. I'd have a headache the whole time because the air was so bad. That air from those places, Illinois, Wisconsin, all of the air we breathe has come from there. The particulates have dropped out, but that 200,000 people a year in Vermont is 400 people. About another person every 22 hours on average. 12 people in Brattleboro. I'm sorry, 8 people in Brattleboro. I had that wrong. But all of us know people who have recently died or are about to die or whatever prematurely because of these problems with air pollution. And what they're trying to do is to maintain the problem. And honestly, I don't see how they can do that without liability. You know, what I'm saying is I think there are people involved in this who should probably be prosecuted. Donald Trump, however, says that he has the ability to pardon himself.
That will play out. No, it's alarming, and I don't think enough people are talking about it or thinking about it. But hopefully this show will
make a
open
difference.
up conversations in communities.
Our next item is from Winona Daily News. And this I thought was a fascinating piece of material.
What happens to our trash and recycling in Winona? We followed a cereal box through the process.
I'm speaking as the author of the article. I followed a cereal box and its liner through the trash and recycling process. They went through a journey involving companies in 3 different states, Loud Machinery, and in the case of the box, a potential trade war with China. Lori, what have you got on this? What do you think?
Well, I'm always pleased when I see people are recycling and communities are really encouraging, if not requiring, recycling. But I think that that's not where the conversation ends and where the action ends, because recycling is clearly an energy-rich process.
It sure is.
Requires a lot of energy to do that, but
it also generates energy.
Apparently, there's even potential trade wars at risk. So, recycling is absolutely a piece of the puzzle. I noticed on your logo you have the symbol to remind us that we should also be reusing and reducing. at a higher rate.
Right.
And recycling is a last resort.
Well, one of the things, though, is that trash is valuable, and particularly if it can be put through processes that turn it into something else. Plastic is amazing. It's so bad. It's just amazing. I mean, the UN just had its Environment Day, and the focus was plastic, and it's absolutely astonishing how bad that is. The thing that happened with China was that the Chinese said, we're not importing trash anymore. And so that means the United States has to deal with its own waste. And the damage that's been done in China from waste processing has been very great. And I can't blame them for saying we don't want to have this problem.
No, I don't either. And I'm wondering how many people are aware. You know, we don't learn about these sorts of things in school, so I don't know if people in general are even aware that China has been purchasing our garbage for however long it's been purchasing it. It seems like an awful big distance to
yes, it does.
send something.
It does. I remember when I was little, my grandmother in Winchester, New Hampshire, being upset about two things. One was aluminum and the other was plastic. And the reason she was upset about them was because neither of them decomposed. And she always put everything in a hole in the ground, which was, I mean, it was better than nothing. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than nothing. Everything went into a hole in the ground, all the kitchen waste, and she wanted the aluminum and the plastic to decompose. And I mentioned that not many years after I observed it to a very old friend of mine. And by old, I mean I was 20 and he was 75. 75. And he said that when he was young, living in Philadelphia, they kept everything. The food waste went out on a daily basis, but they had a pile of rags that went to a rag man. They had a pile of metal waste, which went to a metal waste guy. You know, everything had its little place, and it all went out to somebody who came by. This was not paid for by the town or the city. These people were making money on this. And what happened was the trash collection came and they said, you can throw everything in here, it'll be really easy. And it has turned out not to be so. You know, Tori Weekers gave me a birthday present, which was a book called, I think it was called Garbage. And it was about the history of garbage in the United States. One of the most fascinating books I have ever read. Rikers Island, the place where the prison is, was a trash dump. And at one point in its history, you didn't want to be on Rikers Island because literally the ground under you could explode because of the decomposition into methane gas and the fires that were going on simultaneously. So
talk about air pollution.
we've had a crazy past, and we're not out of it. We're not out of the woods.
No, we're not.
Okay, we are up to.
Plastic is everywhere.
It sure is. Monday, June 4th. I've seen pictures of plastic where the countryside was 100% covered with plastic, and there were trees sticking up, where the plastic had been washed in by a high tide.
Oh my goodness.
And covered everything.
Where was that?
I think it might have been Myanmar or Thailand or someplace, Cambodia. Okay.
And it's probably not isolated to that place.
Oh
where
no,
you saw
not at all.
You just happened to see it.
I just
there.
happened to see it. We have an item from
Yes.
CNN and another picture.
Oh, good.
So
another doom and gloom picture.
We're full of doom and gloom. This particular article has a kind of a funny side to it if you regard what I'm going to call funny as actually funny.
We have to have a sense of humor now, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Sea level rise is pushing coastal property owners to move to higher ground.
Multiple scientific studies indicate that concern about climate change is having impacts on the values of real estate that are exposed to flooding. This is especially evidenced by beachfront real estate markets. Not surprisingly, property owners who see increased coastal flooding due to slowly rising sea levels are moving to higher ground. Donald.
I don't want to pick on CNN, but that's kind of an obvious statement.
Obvious statement.
Well,
The idea of moving to higher ground?
the beachfront real estate markets are showing this.
Well, the thing that struck me about this is that Donald Trump has got all those properties that are right along the beach. And you know, Mar-a-Lago has a street that runs between it and the ocean.
Yes.
And that street had a sinkhole open right in the middle of it. At some point, I kind of suspect that our president is going to understand that he's been had by people who are denying something that's real.
But will he admit it?
I don't know what he's going to do. I think he's going to be furious. Okay, our next item is from Quartz. He'll fire them and tell them that it's their fault, not his.
That's true.
Okay.
The world set a new record for renewable power in 2017, but emissions are still rising.
In 2017, the world set a new record for renewable power capacity added to the grid. In fact, the money spent on renewable installations was more than twice the sum spent on nuclear and fossil fuel power combined, according to the annual global status report published by renewables policy group REN21. But it's not enough to reduce emissions. I don't know what to say.
Well, I would say that some people would be discouraged by that, but it shouldn't stop us because
we can't
don't have a choice.
We can't afford to be discouraged.
Right.
Being discouraged is a luxury. Okay, from GMA News, we have this item.
Big investors urge G7 to step up climate action. Shift from coal.
There you go. Institutional investors managing $26 trillion in assets called on the group of 7 leaders to phase out the use of coal power generation to help limit climate change. This is a group of people who, by the way, are asking Donald Trump not to save coal. $26 trillion. Their call came despite strong opposition from Washington. They wrote that the Paris Agreement plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions were too weak to limit warming. I think that says it right there.
And it's supported by the article just discussed from Quartz.
Yes. Okay, we're up to Tuesday, June 5th. And we have an item from the BBC and a picture for this. More gloom and doom. That is smoke coming up from a gas flare in the picture. And why is the gas burning? Because it's uneconomical to capture it for sale, so they just let it go, but it's too bad if they just let it go. It's not safe, so they burn it, and it makes smoke and makes climate change worse and does no good for anybody. But what's the word here?
The carbon bubble could cost global economy trillions.
A rapid reduction in demand for fossil fuels could see the global economy losses of $1 trillion to $4 trillion by 2035, according to a report. Energy efficiency and low carbon technology could cause the downturn, even if governments fail to take the steps to meet the Paris climate goals. So now we're at a point where the authors of this article are saying that we're going to see a reduction in carbon emissions even if the governments do nothing. And of course the reason for that is because the companies that are making investments find it cheaper to invest in renewable energy.
There's a lot to think about in that. short synopsis. I don't.
Yes.
It's sort of a double-edged sword because there's always a little bit of bad news with a little bit of good news, and it's
Well, there's bad news and there's good news,
any
yes.
time that the environment wins, it's good.
But you know, they say that this could be as bad as the real estate crisis in 2008. And did you see the movie The Big Short?
I saw a movie about that, but that doesn't sound like that was the title, so it may have been a different movie, so
Okay.
I maybe should say no.
Anyway, that was a problem. That period, the real estate bubble was a problem. All bubbles are problems, but they're saying there's the carbon bubble, which people have been talking about for years. Okay, perhaps we should move on. PV Tech is our next source. We should get ourselves up, Lori.
Okay.
There you go.
China putting major brakes on solar deployment as new market rules imposed.
In a coordinated move, 3 administrative agencies in the Chinese government issued a notice imposing caps and reducing feed-in tariffs while setting rules at the central government level for utility-scale projects. The aim of the 2008 solar PV power generation notice is to prevent excessive solar PV generation capacity from being installed. The Chinese have done this before. They did it with wind a couple of years ago. And if you look at what they're actually doing, what they're saying is our transmission system is not keeping up with the solar projects. We don't have the storage we need. We have to take a breather here. And so I included this because I wanted people to know it is in the news, but it's not exactly what it appears to be at first glance.
That's good.
So our next item is from PV Magazine Australia, and we have a picture here of a solar array which happens to be in California, but it is relevant. The Australians regard this as a relevant picture.
Okay. Well, we're going to be talking about California gets more power from solar than gas in May.
And you know, I just read that wrong because it is from PV Magazine in Australia, but it is about California.
Yes.
Data from California's grid operator shows that in May, solar generation in the area managed by the California ISO rose to a new record, providing nearly 17% of in-state generation, with gas falling to about 15%. This means solar provided more electricity for Californians than gas for the first time ever on a monthly basis.
I almost jumped up and down with joy when I read that. I did a test run. I read these before this morning so that I wouldn't fall out of my chair or do anything inappropriate, and that one was definitely
Well, do you remember when I think it was
a good one
in San Diego a year ago, 2 years ago, whenever it was, they had that horrible blowout of methane.
Yes.
And San Diego Power and Gas, San Diego Gas and Electric, decided to replace peaking plants with solar plants because of that.
It got their attention?
Yeah, it got their attention. Yeah.
This actually makes me want to go back to the article we just discussed briefly about China.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Go ahead.
China's government being either proactive or reactive, whatever the case may be, slowing down because the infrastructure can't keep up with the production, the solar production. I wonder if that's why in Vermont we have limits on solar.
Actually, I think it is.
So that we don't get into that same place
I
where
think
we're
that's
playing
what it
catch
is.
up. So it's
Right.
we're just trying to be
Right.
measured.
I don't know Mary Powell, for example. I know people who know her, and I talk with people at Green Mountain Power, and they are concerned about what happens if the grid is not stable. But they're really interested in moving to renewable energy. They just want to do it in a reasonable, straightforward kind of properly
Responsible.
engineered way.
Okay, good.
So I think you're absolutely
That's
right
good,
there.
because I'm a little bit more cynical than that at times, and I didn't make that connection.
A lot of people are a little bit more cynical than that. We're up to Wednesday, June 6th.
Okay.
And maybe we should have a picture
Let's
of us.
see what we have. Oh, okay.
Could we have a picture of us?
Sure.
Okay. This is from Power Engineering International.
World's first grid-scale liquid air energy storage plant goes live.
Wow. The world's first grid-scale liquid air energy storage plant has been officially launched near Manchester. This is Manchester in the UK. The 5 megawatt, 15 megawatt hour plant is the first grid-scale demonstration of liquid air energy storage. The technology stores air as a liquid and then converts it back to gas by letting it boil, driving turbines to generate electricity. Now, I should tell you, this is not air. What they're doing is they're dropping the nitrogen out of the air and storing liquid nitrogen. And liquid nitrogen is strange stuff. I should tell you a story about liquid nitrogen. This stuff is like 350 degrees below zero. You know, it's cold. I used to work in a place where we made chemicals that were used for, they were phosphorescent and fluorescent pigments. And some of them, the color had to be exactly right, okay? So they had a color lab where they were testing fluorescent pigments to make sure that they were correct. The color lab was a smallish room. It might have been, 10 by 15 feet. And it had a big, funny looking machine in the middle with dials that had phosphorescent numbers painted on them so that you could see them in the dark, because the testing had to be done where there was no color contamination. So they needed to have as little light as possible. And the lab technician obviously was wearing a white lab coat, but the walls were black, and the floor was black, and the ceiling was black, and the machine was black. And when they wanted to test this, what they would do is they would start all this stuff up in the dark.
Oh my gosh.
So the only thing you could see was the dials. And then as your eyes adjusted, you could kind of get a picture of this lab technician moving around with his lab coat on. And then during a point in the whole process, something had to be cooled very quickly. And I don't remember, never knew enough about what was going on to know exactly what this was. But they cooled this thing off by dumping about a tablespoon of liquid nitrogen on it, and it just made it really cold. But the liquid nitrogen, after it went on there, just went on the floor.
Oh.
And it sizzled on the floor like water on a red hot frying pan. Well, what it did was it cooled the floor down, and it cooled the air above it down, so that any water vapor that was in that air condensed. And now the lab coat was floating around in fog that was going like this.
What a memory.
You could not have created a thing like this for a movie.
No.
And a science fiction movie, they would have said, this is too hokey.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
I haven't seen that.
We should go on. Our next item is from the BBC, and we have our last picture of this.
Oh, righty. That looks familiar.
What's the title?
Microsoft sinks data center off Orkney.
Microsoft has sunk a data center off in the sea off Orkney, or Orkney obviously being the islands north of Scotland, to see whether it can boost energy efficiency. That is to say, whether being in the sea can boost energy efficiency. The data center, a white cylinder containing computers, could sit on the sea floor for up to 5 years. An undersea cable brings the data center power and takes its data to the shore and the wider internet, but repairs are not possible.
I hadn't heard this.
Huh?
I hadn't heard this.
You hadn't heard this?
No.
Well, this was today's. And, you know, it's like, what do you do with a data center? Well, a lot of the stuff that goes on in a data center is dissipating heat. And if you have it in a submarine station that's in the water, it just goes away of its own accord. So they're saving energy by not having to have air conditioners. Can you imagine this?
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Okay, our last item is from Mother Jones.
Oh.
Don't you love this?
The White House apparently forgot to tell NOAA not to mention climate change.
Sea level rise and climate change are not phrases that Trump appointees typically use to describe anything but hoaxes. But on Monday, the acting head of NOAA, the National Oceanic, you got it right.
Yes.
I'm going to stumble over it. Spoke to a crowd of more than 600 scientists, advocates, and policymakers about the agency's commitment to studying climate change and its effect on warming oceans. We've got, you know, I mean, there's a point at which these people have to admit that science is correct. Climate change is happening. Mar-a-Lago is going to be in trouble. The sea level is rising. And they're going to have to admit either that they lied or they were taken advantage of by liars or they were just mistaken. And considering that they knew that this was happening 40 years ago, it's hard to imagine that they can, I don't know what they're going to do, but it is coming apart. NOAA is admitting that climate change is a big deal. The new administrator of NASA, Jim Bridenstine, is admitting that climate change is a big deal. He was a guy who, on the floor of the House of Representatives, was arguing that climate change had stopped, and now he's saying they have to keep looking at it. He says it's real. He knows that it's real. This is the head of NASA, who was just only took the job about 6 weeks ago. And in the last few months, he has been looking at science and come to the conclusion that it's a problem.
It's a little concerning to think that some of these people may be out of a position and some of these agencies and administrations may be dismantled, because we've seen that.
We've seen attempts to do it.
Attempts.
Absolutely, we have. You know, my
2 years
own
in.
view on this is that about $1 billion, maybe more, but certainly the Heritage Foundation put up $889 million, they said, to influence the last election to people in Congress and the White House. And these positions in Congress were basically purchased by people who had a reason to put that much money into the election. And if you track where that money came from, it came from the fossil fuels industry. The same industry that has been denying that climate change is happening, the same industry that's going to be the subject of this bubble popping, and they want to keep things going. You know, they want the party to keep going for however long it can go. You know, there's a point in the Big Short where two investors say to a person who's selling bonds in the mortgage market, what do you think about defaults? And the guy said, stop being such a buzzkill. If I can see this market keep going for 2 years, I'm going to be rich, I'm going to have my house in Aspen, and that's what I want. Lori, we're at the end of our broadcast.
Wow.
So
That was fun.
I'm glad you liked it. I want you to come back whenever you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we hope to see you, or we hope that you will see us, because we can't see you, next time. Bye.